My name is Monroe Taylor, 35 years old, a single mother to an 11-year-old daughter. In just a few months, I lost my job, my home, and was left with $1,000, the final amount standing between us and homelessness. Late at night, desperately scrolling my phone for rentals, I found a listing for an abandoned property auction. An old farmhouse sitting on 4 acres, starting bid $900. Ignoring my best friend Holly's warning that nothing that cheap comes without trouble, I took every cent I had to the auction and won. But when I received the keys, a court clerk stared at me for a long moment before softly saying, "You do know someone went missing there, right? Would you run or step inside?" Comment your thoughts, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell because what happens next will be hard to believe. I steered my aging car onto the long dirt road, thick rows of trees on either side trying to swallow the light. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, clutching her worn-out doll, her eyes glowing as the GPS announced we were only a few hundred yards away. "I can't believe we're about to have our own house, Mom," she squealed. "A real house with a yard, maybe even a garden." I smiled, though my heart felt heavy. As the road opened up, the house came into view and my spirits sank. The outer walls were blotchy, the white paint peeling off in large patches, exposing the silver-gray wood beneath. A few window panes were shattered, the rest boarded up with rotting planks. The yard was no longer grass but a sea of waist-high weeds mixed with brittle brambles climbing right up to the porch steps. Sophie fell silent. She turned to me, still looking for a reason to stay excited. "We probably need to clean it up a bit, right, Mom?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, a bit of cleaning." I wanted to believe that. I turned off the engine and stepped out. The earthy scent of damp soil and decaying wood hit my nose. As we stepped onto the porch, the plank beneath our feet groaned like a tired sigh. Inside was worse. The air was thick with damp mildew mixed with layers of dust and something sharp and animal-like, as if creatures had once lived and possibly died here. Faint light slipped through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating cobwebs spun as thick as thread. Mouse droppings, splintered wood, and chunks of fallen ceiling lay scattered across the floor. I was still frozen when a woman's voice called from the doorway. "Hello there, you must be the new owner?" I turned around. A small, sharp-eyed woman in her 70s stood there holding a basket, a rich buttery scent drifting up, the only warmth in sight. "I'm Langley. I live down the hill." Saw a strange car and figured. She handed me the basket, her sun-toughened hand surprisingly steady. "A welcome gift for you and your girl." "Thank you. I'm Monroe and this is my daughter, Sophie." She nodded, but her eyes flicked into the house with hesitation. "You know this used to belong to Dr. Alara Wynn?" I shook my head. "I only know it's been abandoned for years." Mrs. Langley's grip tightened on the basket handle. "Alara was a brilliant scientist. Once worked on a government project. Then one day she quit everything, came here to live in hiding. 20 years ago she vanished. Left no trace, no note. Police searched everywhere but found nothing. Since then, no one wants to live here." Sophie pressed against me, her eyes huge. "Did she really go missing?" The old woman looked at her, voice low and slow. "Yes, and there are those who believe this house keeps memories." I laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Probably just rumors." Mrs. Langley pursed her lips and said nothing. As she stepped away, Sophie tugged my hand and whispered, "Mom, when we came in, I saw a woman standing at the upstairs window. She was looking down at us." My heart lurched. "What woman?" "I don't know, long hair, wearing an old white dress. But," she glanced toward the creaky staircase, "that window is nailed shut with boards. How could she be there?" A chill went through me. Sophie wasn't the type to make up stories to frighten. I moved toward the stairs, peering up the dark shaft leading to the second floor. No sound. Only faint light seeping through cracks in the boards, throwing stains across the ceiling. So my heart thudded. I turned to her, trying to keep calm. It might have been a shadow or a trick of the light. Sophie stayed quiet, clutching her doll tighter like an anchor. I told myself I'd check the second floor soon. But for now, I gently rested a hand on her shoulder and said, "Come on, let's look at the rooms downstairs first." Mrs. Langley still hovered on the porch, her eyes holding a message she didn't say aloud. As we reached the doorway again, she finally added, "If you ever hear footsteps upstairs at night, don't be too quick to blame the wind." Her words clung to me all afternoon as we began to clean room by room. The house was silent, but every so often I heard wood creak on the upper floor, despite knowing no one was there. And I knew this house had never forgotten what happened inside its walls. The attic felt like an entirely different world. Light squeezed through a single tiny window coated in dust so thick it looked frosted. I kept sneezing as I brushed through layered cobwebs hanging from the rafters. Moldy cardboard boxes lay strewn about, some chewed through by mice, spilling yellowed books and scraps of fabric. I almost ignored the farthest corner, until my flashlight caught a dull glint beneath the floorboards. Kneeling, I noticed one plank slightly raised, misaligned with the rest. I wedged a small knife into the gap. With a sharp pop, it lifted. Beneath was a shallow cavity just big enough for an old wooden chest. Its surface was scratched, the metal fittings tarnished, the lock in antique style. I touched it. The wood was cold and dry, carrying the scent of time. "Sophie, come here, I found something." She dashed over, her eyes lighting up. "What's inside?" "Not sure yet, but it looks important." I jiggled the lock, it didn't budge. Sophie glanced around, then picked up a thin iron rod from the corner. "Let's try prying it open." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together we twisted and pried until the lock snapped. The lid of the chest lifted, a cloud of dust rising that made me sniffle. Inside lay a faded layer of green velvet, carefully wrapping 3 items: a leather-bound notebook, a stack of photographs, and a large brass key engraved with a strange symbol, a cross between a leaf and an ancient character. I took the notebook first. The leather cover was soft and smooth, though the corners were worn, clearly handled often. The words "E. Win" were neatly italicized on the first page. The handwriting inside was elegant and decisive, shifting between cursive notes and scientific symbols. The first pages recorded Alara's early days after moving here, descriptions of the climate, soil, and wild plants growing naturally around the farm. There were incredibly detailed sketches of plants I had never seen before. Odd flowers, leaves with unusual shapes, some appearing almost luminescent in the drawings. The more I read, the thicker the air in the attic seemed to become. Alara wrote about a biological compound she was researching, called Substance X17, with the potential to change the future of modern medicine. She described it as a breakthrough for neurodegenerative treatment, but never once included the full formula. Then her tone began to shift. "I feel like I'm being watched. Every time I go out for supplies, there's a black car parked nearby. I receive unsigned letters telling me to cooperate, if I don't want to regret it." Another page read. "They want this compound. They say it will save millions of lives, but what I see in their eyes isn't compassion, it's calculation. If I disappear, the truth lies where only someone patient enough will find it." I stopped reading, a chill crawling down my spine. Sophie was pressed up beside me, her eyes worried. "Mom, who are they?" "For now, I don't know." But it's clear she was scared. I moved to the stack of photos. Some were of carefully maintained plant beds. Others were of a lab room with glass jars of pale blue liquid. One showed Alara standing next to a man in a long coat, his face hidden in shadow, only his gloved hand holding a folder visible. On the edge of the photo in blue ink, Alara had written, "Do not trust." Finally, I picked up the brass key. It was heavy and cool, the engravings delicate. I tried to imagine which lock in the house it fit, but I had never seen anything like it on any door or cabinet. Sophie whispered, "Maybe it opens the place where she hid the truth, like in the movies, Mom." I gave a small smile, though my eyes stayed fixed on the symbol etched into the shaft. "Maybe, but to find out we have to follow the trail she left behind." Closing the journal, I felt as if I was holding a piece of Alara Wynn's forgotten life. A life of brilliance and pursuit, and fear of being hunted. Somewhere in this house, there was still something she wanted us to find. It took me nearly a whole morning to trace the clues in the photos Alara left. In several shots of the property, I noticed an overgrown corner of the old horse stable, nearly swallowed by weeds and clearly untouched for years. Once Sophie was napping in the car, I took the brass key and headed that way. The stable was decayed, half the roof caved in, the sharp smell of damp wood mixed with the lingering scent of old manure. But at the back wall, a section of wood was noticeably different in color. I tapped it, there was a hollow echo behind it that made me pause. Shoving aside dead boards and straw, I uncovered a steel trapdoor buried beneath thick dust. Brushing it clean, an engraved lock appeared. The symbol matched perfectly with the key we discovered in the chest. I took a deep breath and inserted the key. It clicked loudly, slicing through the silence that had ruled this place for decades. The hatch swung open, a burst of cold air rising into my face. A narrow staircase led downward, the concrete walls intact. The dim glow of my phone flashlight swept over the stairwell, catching drifting particles in the air. At the bottom, there was a thick metal door labeled Lab 02, Private. The brass key slid in again and turned smoothly. When the door opened, I nearly forgot to breathe. Inside was a sealed room about 200 square feet, everything preserved as if Alara had stepped out only yesterday. Rows of glass jars filled with colorful liquids stood on metal shelves, labels written in her familiar handwriting. Machines, some I didn't recognize, lined the laboratory table. The scent was a mix of mild chemicals and dried herbs, strange yet not unpleasant. In the corner sat a dark wooden desk piled with documents. I opened folders. Chemical formulas, experiment result charts, detailed notes on the extraction of X17 from a plant I couldn't identify. Among the papers I found a brown envelope marked Contingency. Inside was a map of a national forest about an hour's drive away, with a remote spot deep in an untracked area circled. In Alara's writing it read, "If this place is breached, go here." I was still processing it all when a sudden flicker in the ceiling corner made me jump. Looking up, I saw a camera no bigger than a fingertip, nestled between a steel beam and a conduit. A tiny red LED blinked. My heart pounded. There was no way this was from Alara's time. The technology was newer, more advanced. Someone had been here after she disappeared, and had left this behind. I stepped underneath it, staring straight into the lens, keeping my face calm. Then I pulled off my jacket and draped it over the camera, cutting its view. At that moment, Sophie's voice echoed from above. "Mom, where are you?" There was a hint of panic in her tone. "Coming right now," I shouted back, shoving the map and several folders into my backpack. There was so much more to uncover, but I couldn't leave Sophie alone any longer. Back on the surface, I found Sophie by the car, her eyes fixed on the dirt road. "Mom," a black car stopped at the gate and then drove off. Someone inside looked this way. The chill from the lab now swept fully through me. I secured the trapdoor again, pulling the straw and old boards back into place, then rushed Sophie toward the main house. That afternoon, I sat alone at the kitchen table, reviewing all the notes I had taken. Besides research data, Alara had left fragmented diary entries. April 12th. I found unfamiliar boot prints near the stable. Not from neighbors. April 15th. Car sounds at night. They're getting closer. April 18th. Lab camera shows someone touching the outer door. I must act soon. I stared out the window. The feeling of being watched was no longer imagination. That night, once Sophie was asleep, I locked every door, switched off the lights, and sat in darkness, staring toward the yard. The silence was so deep I could hear the insects. Then from afar, headlights swept the dirt road. A car moved slowly, pausing for a few seconds directly in front of our turnoff, then rolled on. I knew then we had stepped into something dangerous, and whoever was involved was already one step ahead. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast when the deep rumble of an engine drifted from the road. Through the window, I saw a sleek black SUV parked at the gate. It didn't look like any local vehicle. Polished body, windows tinted too dark to see inside. I stepped onto the porch, the crisp country morning air suddenly heavy. The car door opened and a tall, silver-haired man in a gray suit stepped out. His eyes were sharp, as if measuring every move I made. "Mrs. Taylor." His voice was deep and smooth, trained for negotiation. "Yes. Who are you?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Daniel Kessler. I represent a biomedical research firm. We understand you recently acquired this property." He opened a case, pulled out a thin folder, then slid forward a check. $250,000 in cash, payable immediately. In exchange, you'll sign over full ownership of the land and everything inside. I stared at the check, an amount that could change everything for Sophie and me. But his eyes and the way he emphasized everything inside told me this was far more than a real estate deal. "I'm not selling," I said, more firmly than I expected. Kessler raised a brow, then smiled faintly. You might want to think of your daughter. A shiver ran up my arms. Is that advice, or a threat? He didn't answer, just closed the case, turning back toward the SUV. Before climbing in, he glanced over his shoulder. This opportunity won't last forever. The SUV rolled away, leaving a thin trail of dust in the sunshine. All afternoon I watched the road. Sophie played in the backyard, but I kept her within sight. I relocked the lab hatch, hiding it as if it had never been disturbed. Night fell. I tried convincing myself things would stay quiet. But before midnight, when I had barely drifted to sleep, a soft noise echoed across the roof. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The darkness in the room felt thick, broken only by silver moonlight slipping through the curtain seam. I motioned silently for Sophie to stay quiet and remain in the room. The footsteps stopped above the front awning, then went quiet. I carefully pulled back the curtain to look outside. The front yard was still, just long shadows from the trees. But at the edge of my vision, a sudden movement. A figure sprinted across the grass and disappeared into the tree line. I threw on a coat, grabbed the flashlight and wooden bat I kept by the door. Stepping onto the porch, a cold wind hit my face, carrying the scent of damp earth and weeds. I swept the flashlight across the yard. No clear footprints, no sound. Only insects buzzing and, in the distance, a lone owl. Back inside, I locked the door tight and wedged a wooden bar into the frame. Sophie was still sitting on the bed, clutching her doll. Mom, was that the man from this morning? Her voice trembled. Whoever it was, they won't get in. But deep down, I knew Kessler was showing me he could get close whenever he wanted. The next morning, I called Mrs. Langley to ask if she'd seen any strangers in the area. She said no, but her voice dropped when I mentioned the black SUV. Someone saw it parked at the grocery lot last week. They didn't buy a thing, simply waited inside the car. That didn't make me feel any safer. I started documenting everything, the license plate, times, any details I could. By noon, Eli Morgan, my new neighbor who worked as a builder, stopped by to inspect the roof. I told him briefly about last night, leaving out the lab and documents. He frowned. That wasn't kids messing around. Those were steady steps, deliberate. I'll install some motion lights around the house. Monroe, if anyone approaches your daughter, you call me right away. I nodded gratefully. For a moment, I saw something hard in Eli's gaze. A former cop who knew when things were no longer normal. That night, after Sophie went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, turning pages in Alara's journal. Near the end she had written, "When they can't convince, they will sabotage. First contact. Then threatening. If that fails, people disappear. I have seen it happen." Her words echoed what I was living. Kessler had made contact. The threat had been delivered. I knew what came next, and I had to be ready before it hit. That afternoon, as I went to boil water for tea, I noticed the well water had turned cloudy brown. A swampy odor rose from it, making me recoil. At first I blamed last night's rain, until I poured some into a glass. The color was wrong, not muddy. Sophie ran in from the backyard, breathing fast. She reached for her inhaler on the table, but after 2 pumps, her face twisted. "Mom, it's not working." I snatched it from her, shaking it. It was oddly light. I opened it and froze. The medication was gone, replaced by a clear, odorless liquid. Someone had tampered with it. Before I could collect myself, Eli stepped through the door with his tool bag. One look at my face and he asked sharply, "What happened?" I held out the inhaler and the glass of water. Eli took one glance and his entire expression changed. "Monroe, this isn't random. There's more. This morning I saw a strange oil smear under my car. I asked Dave at the repair shop to check. He said the brake line was cut." Eli dropped his bag on the table. "They want you scared and gone. But this crosses a line." I pulled Sophie close as she curled up in a chair. "Eli, who would do this? Why target a single mother with a child?" He was quiet for a moment, then lowered his voice. "I think I know. Have you heard of a name, Helix Corp?" I frowned. "A pharmaceutical company?" "Not pharma," he said. "They're a biotech giant with secret facilities everywhere. When I was still on the force, there were rumors they buried a rare disease cure to protect profits from ongoing treatments. I thought of Alara Wynn's journal of X17 and the organization trying to seize it. Puzzle pieces began to click into place. You think Helix Corp is that organization? Kessler could be working for them. If I'm right, they won't stop. They've sensed you have something they want, and they'll do anything to get it. My hands clenched. I won't let Sophie live in fear every day. But if I run, everything Alara left behind will fall into their hands. Eli looked at me for a long, steady moment. Then I'm staying. You need someone who knows how to watch, guard, and if needed, react fast. Thank you, I whispered. That evening, Eli checked the entire house. He found fresh boot prints near the well heading toward the back fence, prints that didn't match me or Sophie. He installed inside locks on all doors and strung alarm wires around the lab hatch. Sophie sat on the sofa, still shaken. I held her hand. Sweetheart, did you see anyone near the well today? She shook her head, then whispered. But while I was playing outside, I saw a little red flash near the shed, like a camera light. I glanced at Eli. He straightened immediately. Hidden camera. They're watching. We went to the shed, sweeping with flashlights. Up near the ceiling beam was a device the size of a small fist, with a tiny lens and built-in battery. Eli removed it carefully, keeping prints intact, and sealed it in a plastic bag. This is more advanced than what I've seen before, he said. Whoever placed it knew how to get close without being noticed. So, they've seen everything? He didn't answer. Instead, he set his hand on my shoulder. From now on, assume everything outside the bedroom is being watched. We'll talk only in safe spots. That night, rain poured hard. It masked most sounds, yet I still heard faint noises on the porch, as if something was being dragged or dropped. Eli signaled for me to stay while he went out with a flashlight. Minutes later, he returned, face dark. Someone disturbed the straw covering the stable hatch. They know about it but didn't manage to open it yet. The lock is still intact for now. I held Sophie tightly, feeling the circle closing in. And I knew if Helix Corp truly was behind this, everything that happened today was only the beginning. Mrs. Langley arrived on a drizzly afternoon, carrying a basket of fresh eggs. We sat in the kitchen, warm steam from the teapot fogging the windows. After a while, she lowered her voice, eyes searching mine. Monroe, Alara once told me this house has a memory, she began. Not in a ghostly sense, but she designed the structure itself to hide important things. Information that, if in the wrong hands, could be dangerous. I frowned. You mean, inside the walls? Under the floors? She believed that someone observant enough could find them. But that person must be very patient. Her words made me think of the strange symbols in the journal and the brass key. After she left, I decided to search the house more thoroughly, starting in the living room, where I'd noticed stains on the wall I once thought were marks of time. Eli and I removed aged wooden panels behind an old bookcase. Between two layers of boards, thick with dust and cobwebs, faint charcoal markings appeared. When we brushed the dust off, a drawing came into view, a simple but detailed map of the property. In one corner, a small arrow pointed toward the woods behind the house, ending in a circle with a dot, marking a specific location. Eli pointed at it. That looks like the old well. I spotted its broken stone rim while patrolling the forest edge. The next morning, we packed flashlights, rope, and a metal bucket. Sophie begged to come along, but I left her at home with Mrs. Langley for safety. The forest path was damp, heavy with the scent of rotting leaves and sap. Birds chirped in short bursts, then fell silent as we passed. The abandoned well rested in a shallow clearing, its stone walls carpeted in moss the color of deep green age. The water inside was so dark it didn't reflect even daylight. Eli tied the rope around his waist and climbed down first with a flashlight. From above, my heart raced as I heard his voice echoing up. There's something wedged between two stones at the bottom. After a bit, Eli surfaced with a small steel box wrapped in water-resistant rubber. Its surface was freshly scratched, as if someone else had tried unsuccessfully to pull it out. We returned home, locked the doors, and only then opened the box. Inside were three things: a silver USB drive, a bundle of old photographs, and a small plastic pouch containing a mini cassette tape. I picked up the first photograph. Alara stood beside a man in military uniform, wearing an insignia I didn't recognize. His face was stern, but his eyes held unmistakable trust in Alara. Other pictures showed them in a laboratory, surrounded by seedling trays and research equipment. Eli stared closely. That insignia belongs to a biomedical research unit within the military. They used to collaborate with civilian scientists on special projects. I moved on to the tape. Eli pulled an old recorder from his toolkit, one he kept from his police days just for reviewing evidence tapes. As it played, a crackle sounded first, then a man's voice emerged, deep and cold. "Dr. Wynn, you know what will happen if you continue to refuse. You have something we need. If you cooperate, this will be easier for both of us." Alara's voice responded, calm but firm. "I won't hand my work to someone who will turn it into a tool for profit. It was created to save lives." A low chuckle followed before the man spoke again. "Idealism won't feed you. And sometimes idealism kills faster than any disease." Silence stretched out, then the sound of a door slamming and footsteps leaving. Every clue, from her journal to the lab and now this tape, pointed to one thing. Alara had been directly threatened because of her research. Eli placed a hand on the table, his voice heavy. "Monroe, with what we've found, they'll do anything to get it back. And now they know you have it." The USB from the steel box wasn't a data backup. It held an entire archive meticulously organized. Inside were the complete formulas for X-17 detailed clinical trials and, most alarming, a long list of names. Scientists, technicians, even members of military units who had worked on something called Phase Orion. I opened another audio file. Daniel Kessler's voice came through sharply, no longer smooth and diplomatic but metallic, clipped. "Alara, you understand what Phase Orion means. We've invested too much to let one individual destroy it. If you won't release all the data, we'll use other methods." Alara replied, her voice shaky but unyielding. "Your other methods include human testing without consent. I won't let that happen." I closed the file. Eli crossed his arms. If Phase Orion is real, they've already crossed every legal boundary. We have to go to Alara's contingency location. If this is only the backup she managed to hide, then the rest might be the final proof. The next morning we set out early. Sophie insisted on going and I knew I couldn't leave her behind now. Eli packed water, dried food, flashlights, and a topographical map. The trail into the national forest wound through thick pine ridges. The smell of sap and damp soil filled the air, wind whispering through thousands of needles overhead. We followed a marked path for an hour before veering off onto a narrow track shown only on Alara's map. After more than 2 hours, as sunlight struggled through dense canopy, Eli suddenly raised his hand. "Hear that?" I held my breath. Amid the rustling leaves, another sound, branches snapping from multiple directions. Before we could react, 3 figures in camouflage stepped out from behind the trees, faces hidden under black cloth. One of them shouted, "Stop! Hand over the packs." Eli pulled Sophie and me backward. "Run," he hissed, and we bolted downhill. Footsteps thundered close behind. The slippery slope covered in wet leaves sent me skidding more than once, but adrenaline kept me upright. We leapt across a narrow creek, icy water splashing our legs. Eli kicked a boulder down behind us, slowing them momentarily. Ahead, a dark cave mouth opened in the mossy hillside. With no other options, we ducked inside. The air was cold and damp, my heart beat loud in the enclosed space. Eli signaled for silence. Outside, footsteps slowed. Voices muttered, too faint to catch. A shadow appeared at the entrance, flashlight cutting the dark. Its beam swept across my cheek, then paused at a rock wall behind, missing us only because Eli had pulled us tight into a deep crevice. After several tense minutes, the steps retreated. Still, Eli waited longer before whispering, "They haven't left. They're hoping to flush us out." I squeezed Sophie's hand. She trembled but whispered, "I'm okay, Mom." We followed a narrow passage deeper, praying for another exit. A faint glow ahead signaled a small opening on the slope above thick underbrush. From there we looped around, taking steeper hidden ground to avoid detection. Finally, near dusk, we reached the sunken clearing marked on the map. In the center lay a flat stone slab, propped by smaller stones beneath. Eli and I lifted them one by one, revealing a steel-lined compartment. Inside was a wooden box wrapped tightly in oilcloth. I opened it, Another USB, a thick handwritten notebook, and a sealed envelope inscribed with, "If you find this, protect it at all costs." I knew then that everything inside was what made Helix Corp willing to chase us across half the forest. And now, holding it in my hands, I understood we would never be safe the way we were before. I remember that morning clearly when Clara Jennings called me from the old desk phone at the newspaper. Her voice was low, raspy, edged with a kind of excitement I had never heard from her. "We're going to make it undeniable," Clara said, each word like a nail. "But you must understand, once this hits the front page, there's no going back." I glanced at Eli, sitting by the window, dawn light catching the healing scratches on his face. He gave a small nod, the quiet confirmation that we were ready. I brought all the USBs, photos, and recordings to Clara's office. She opened her weathered laptop, her eyes scanning line after line of data, pausing longest at the files marked classified. The air in the room felt thick, as if every word carried dangerous weight. Eli passed the rest of the material to an old friend at the FBI, Agent Marcus Hill. Marcus wasn't a man of many words, but his gaze told me it wouldn't be buried. "Helix Corp will answer for every life they dismissed," he said as he tucked the evidence into a waterproof bag and walked out. 2 days later, everything exploded. Clara's newspaper ran a bold headline across the front page: "Helix Corp's Dark Secret, Human Trials and the Hidden Power Network." TV stations picked up the story. Social media ignited with posts, videos, and clips from the data we had brought into the light. Daniel Kessler vanished from his office just hours before a federal warrant was issued. The FBI shut down Helix Corp headquarters, rounded up employees for interrogation, and froze countless bank accounts. But the most shocking news came on the third day. Federal agents announced they had found Alara's remains at an abandoned quarry on the northern outskirts. Next to her body was a silver cloth bag containing an old water-stained journal. I opened it with shaking hands. Her handwriting was still soft but hurried, like every line was written in a race against time. "If I never return, let this work save lives. Do not let my blood be wasted." I stayed quiet for a long while, my throat tightening with emotion. Eli laid a hand gently on my shoulder. "She trusted you. And you did right." Clara, standing nearby, closed the journal carefully, as if afraid to damage the last memory of Alara. "We will make sure her story lives on," she said, firm but soft. That afternoon, Eli and I returned to the house. The living room, where I had once found the charcoal map, felt like it breathed differently. Light streamed in across the wall, and I felt as though Alara was somewhere nearby, watching. Sophie ran in, clutching a stack of newspapers, eyes shining. "They said Helix Corp will face a public trial. That means everyone will know the truth, right?" I nodded, smiling at her. "Yes. No one can hide it anymore." Outside, autumn wind swirled golden leaves down onto the porch. I thought of Alara's words. "The house has a memory." And now that memory wasn't hidden anymore. It was sent out into the world, as both a warning and a spark of hope for those who would walk through this door after us. That evening, golden sunlight washed over the lavender rose, laying a velvety glow across the land. I leaned against the wooden frame of the lab door, cradling a steaming mug of mint tea in my hands. Down in the yard, Sophie laughed as she guided a group of visitors from Oregon, her voice drifting on the breeze. "This is where we grow Alara's breath," she explained proudly, her small hand brushing the young green plants. "It supports the lungs and eases stress. Each plant is cared for by hand and heart." Looking at her hair shimmering under the sun, I remembered the pale and fragile girl from a year ago. Today she could run the length of the garden, leading strangers with confidence. Her rebirth was our rebirth. Eli stepped into the lab, boots dusted with soil. "This week's harvest is ready. I'll take it over to the processing shed," he said, setting a basket of fresh leaves on the table. I smiled. "Have you gotten used to this life yet?" He nodded slightly, a calm settling in his eyes. "After all those years running, I think I've finally found a place worth staying. Not for the work, but because here people see me for who I am, not for my past." I understood better than anyone. We had both been shackled to what came before. Somehow this place had become where we could start undoing all those knots. As the evening slipped toward twilight, soft light washed over lavender fields, turning them violet from end to end. In the far corner between the swaying trees, I suddenly caught sight of a slender woman in a beige cardigan standing still. Alara. Not flesh and blood, but the smile, the eyes. So clear my heart clenched. She's here, isn't she? Eli had come up beside me unnoticed, his voice low. Some people never leave. They live in every breath of the land. Sophie's voice called me to the yard to take photos with the visitors. I stepped away but looked back once more at the garden where Alara had been. Only lavender swayed, yet warmth filled my chest. At the bottom of the steps, a little girl from the group ran up and handed me a sprig of purple lavender, eyes bright. For you, to remember today, she said. I knelt, smiling as I accepted it. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll keep it for a long time. In that moment, I realized this place wasn't just a research center or herbal garden. It was where unfinished stories were allowed to continue, where legacy didn't sleep, but kept living, breathing, and healing. And maybe standing here today, I finally understood. Some houses don't shelter us from rain and sun. They give us purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. This once abandoned farm had become the place where my daughter grew strong, where Eli found family, and where strangers walked in only to leave believing in something new. But what about you? If one day you stumbled upon a forgotten house, would you dare to stake your future on turning it into something different? Do you believe that old walls and tired land can hold the power to heal? I'd love to hear your thoughts about this journey, and even your own stories. Because sometimes, in the smallest shares, we find the greatest connection. If you want to keep following me through stories of family, loss, rebirth, and the surprises life can bring, make sure to follow the channel. Because here we will meet again on many more journeys, where pain doesn't close with darkness, but opens into doorways of hope.